Well, I'm tempted to ask him about the fast and whether he's trying to force the nation to also starve themselves to death, given how expensive a shopping trolley is. But this is what I would say to him this morning. I'd say we've seen Azhar Ali announcing his candidacy for the Rochdale seat as the Labour MP, most of which was spoken in Urdu, the national language of Pakistan. And I would ask Mr Sunak, is he comfortable that the majority of those constituents will not understand a word of what their potential candidate said?
Thanks, Bev. That was, I wouldn't say it was brief, but that's a good question.
The Speaker will be coming for Bev in the House of Commons every week.
To you at home, please send us your question. Tell us who you are and where you're from for your questions to put to our panel. gbnews@gbviews.com.
Yes, PMQs Live is all about you at home. But first of all, we are going to introduce you to our panel. This is GB News, Britain's election channel. PMQs Live starts right now. It is almost midday on Wednesday, the 31st of January. This is PMQs Live on GB News with Gloria Di Piero and Christopher Hobb.
In just one moment, Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head at Prime Minister's questions. We'll have full coverage of every moment, and we'll be getting full reaction from Paul Holmes, Tory MP for Eastleigh and Parliamentary Private Secretary, to Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, and Louise Haigh, the Shadow Transport Secretary.
And, of course, this is supposed to be the moment when Parliament talks about the most important issue facing our nation. So I'm going to start by asking our panel. Paul, what do you think is the most important issue facing our nation right now?
Keeping the economy growing, making sure that we reduce taxes on hard-working people and the health service.
Louise Haigh.
Well, I would say the cost of living crisis. It's making sure that people can afford to pay their bills, pay their rent and mortgage and have a decent standard of living.
And how effective do you think the format of Prime Minister's questions is at talking about the big issues facing the nation?
I think it's really good. I mean, you know, he's got worldwide viewership. The Prime Minister is held under scrutiny, and you get the serious questions and some of the funny questions as well.
And what's it like right now for Sir Keir Starmer? He's got 6 questions, and he's going to work out what's the thing which will land the biggest punch on the PM.
Yeah, I think there's always a balance between what's going to be the best theatre, if you like, in Prime Minister's questions and how it's going to sort of juxtapose the Labour Party with the Conservative Party, but we also want to speak to the country as well, and I think that's why I'm sure Keir will be leading on the issues that are facing ordinary people today.
And you know Rishi Sunak better than most of us. Do you think he looks forward to Wednesday at noon?
I think every Prime Minister gets nervous, but he's a well-briefed Prime Minister, and I think he enjoys speaking to the country about those important issues that matter.
Is social media important? I mean, is it important to click the right question? Who's the audience for it? Is it GB News viewers? Is it MPs, or is it the wider social media crowd?
Well, it's probably why it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because you are appealing and applying to lots of different audiences. There's the journalists sitting up in the lobby that will be writing up their columns and their jokes after PMQs. But yeah, absolutely, social media is clearly the biggest way to reach a wider audience now.
And the Speaker has got to his feet, so...
He's giving a telling off there, I think, about language using questions, Gloria. So this is the moment when, of course, the world's eyes are on the chamber, and the Speaker maybe knows that and is keen to get a message across to the wider public.
He does tell people off. I had a little joke with Bev, didn't I? Because her questions are always a little bit long. We love her, but they don't like you to go on for more than about 30 seconds when you're asking.
Paul, do you think the Speaker's getting more and more interventionist in PMQs? He kept doing a lot last week, we thought.
I think he stands up a bit more because he's a man that wants good order. That's all I'll say on that one.
PMQs Live.
Mr Speaker, on Monday I met the families of Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates, who were killed in Nottingham. I assured them that we would do whatever it takes to get the answers that they want. And Mr Speaker, following constructive dialogue over past months, I welcome the significant steps the DUP have taken to make restoration of the executive possible. I also thank the other political parties in Northern Ireland for the patience that they have shown. After 2 years without an executive, there is now the prospect of power sharing back up and running, strengthening our union, giving people the local accountable government that they need, and offering a brighter future for Northern Ireland. Our honourable friend, the Northern Ireland Secretary, will be making a statement shortly. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
John Church. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I met with a constituent who was employed not by the post office but by a supermarket who operated a franchise post office. She was wrongly accused of dishonesty as a result of the faulty Horizon system, and she was put through a disciplinary process by her employers, the supermarket. This has had a very profound impact on her life. She's not alone, there are others in her position, and yet there's no provision for compensating people who worked in franchise post offices like her. Will the Prime Minister give me a commitment to include these victims in the Horizon scandal compensation?
Well, first of all, can I say I'm very sorry to hear about the Honourable Lady's constituent's case. As I've said, this was an awful miscarriage of justice, and everyone affected deserved not just justice but also compensation and answers. I'll make sure that we look into the precise details of her constituent's case, and surely there will be others like that, and make sure that the Minister gets back to her with all due haste.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sustainable aviation fuel plays a significant part in the sector's decarbonisation. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, commit to further policies for a SAF mandate to generate greater demand, for a revenue support mechanism such as other sectors, solar and wind power generation as well, and so that work starts by the end of next year on the 5 promised sustainable aviation plants here in the UK?
Prime Minister.
I can give my honourable friend the assurance that we are committed to ensuring the SAF mandate will be in place by 2025. And by mandating the use of sustainable aviation fuel, not only will we be able to deliver carbon savings, but also create a brand new UK market. And as one of the steps in introducing the revenue certainty mechanism that he talks about by 2026, DfT will be consulting in the spring this year on options for how that should work in practice.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in welcoming the DUP statement about the return of the Northern Ireland Executive? This is an important moment, and we now need all sides to work together to get Stormont back up and running for the people of Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, I too met the families of Grace, Barnaby and Ian on Monday, and it's impossible to express in words the horror that they've been through and continue to go through. And we must all redouble our efforts to do everything that we can to help them with their campaign. And of course, Mr. Speaker, this week, 2 young lives, 16-year-old Max and 15-year-old Mason, were taken in Bristol. And I know the whole House will join me in sending condolences to their families and their friends. Mr. Speaker, one of the most difficult experiences for any member of this House is speaking to those at the sharp end of this government's cost of living crisis. So nobody could fail to be moved by the plight of the member for Mid Norfolk. His mortgage has gone up £1,200 a month. He's been forced to quit his dream job to pay for it. A Tory MP counting the cost of Tory chaos. After 14 years, have we finally discovered what they meant when they said, "We're all in this together"?
Well, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the mortgage charter that the Chancellor introduced last year, millions of mortgage holders across the country are benefiting from support with their mortgages, because it's important, rather than take the approach that the honourable gentleman just did, is actually focus on the practical support in place to help people who do need help. And someone on a typical mortgage is able to now save hundreds of pounds thanks to those reforms. And actually what we have recently seen is mortgage applications now at a multi-month high as a result of confidence returning. But if he really cared about helping people with the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, he would actually do more to celebrate and acknowledge the fact that thanks to our plan, millions of working people will now start to pay hundreds of pounds less in tax from this month's pay slips, Mr. Speaker. But we all know that's not a priority for him. He said he wanted to back people with the cost of living, but now he has described tax cuts, I read, as salting the earth. His shadow chancellor, it seems, is equally confused. In Davos, she said she did back tax cuts, but back here in Westminster, she called them a scorched earth policy. She obviously can't decide which Wikipedia page to copy this week.
Mr. Speaker, for every £2 he says he's giving people back, he's taking £10 out of their back pocket in higher tax, and he thinks they should be dancing in the street and thanking him. There are 200,000 people, Prime Minister, just like the member for Mid-Norfolk, coming off fixed-rate mortgages and paying more each and every month because they crashed the economy. Does the Prime Minister actually know how much their monthly repayments are going up by?
Prime Minister. As I said, Mr. Speaker, someone on a typical mortgage of about £140,000 with 17 years left is currently paying around £800 as a result of the ability to extend their mortgage term or switch to a 6-month-only, interest-only mortgage. They will be able to save hundreds of pounds, and that is someone on the average mortgage, Mr. Speaker. But again, Mr. Speaker, he says he cares about the cost of living. The thing that would have the biggest impact on everyone's cost of living is the fact that his ideas to spend £28 billion, which we had just confirmed this morning by a Shadow Treasury Minister, I heard, confirmed that they remain committed to them, but he has no plan to pay for this £28 billion, Mr. Speaker. No plan at all. And that's typical Labour economics, because they want to keep the spending but drop the payment plan. And I actually saw at the weekend their former leader, his mentor, was clear that they'll make their sums add up with tax rises on people's assets. Their homes, their pensions and their businesses. It's the same old Labour Party, Mr. Speaker. No plan and back to square one with higher taxes.
Mr. Speaker, they've crashed the economy, mortgages are through the roof, they've doubled the debt, and he thinks he can stand there and lecture other people about fiscal responsibility. But he didn't answer the question. Hundreds of thousands of people are coming off fixed-rate mortgages and facing huge mortgage increases. And the Prime Minister won't even do them the courtesy of answering the question. No, he didn't. So I'll ask him again.
I was very clear at the beginning, and I mean that my constituents to hear it. If yours don't, please leave. Keir Starmer.
Does the Prime Minister have any idea how much mortgages are going up by this month for those coming off fixed-rate mortgages?
Prime Minister. Well, again, I'll just point him back to my previous answer, Mr. Speaker, as I went him through. Everyone's situation will be different. As someone on a typical mortgage of around £140,000, who's currently paying £800, will be able to keep their mortgage payment essentially the same by using the facilitations that the Chancellor has put in place. But again, that's what we've done to help people, Mr. Speaker. But again, it's incumbent on him to explain to the British public how his policy of decarbonising the grid by 2030 is going to be funded. He won't give the answers, but helpfully the Shadow Energy Secretary popped up at the weekend in an interview in the Sunday Times. He said they don't need a plan to pay for it, Mr. Speaker, because in his words it will produce real savings and it makes clear economic sense. Now, the Shadow Leader here doesn't want to talk about it at all, but let me tell him, I see all these years later it's the same story. The Right Honourable Member for Doncaster North has carved a promise in stone and everyone else just looks away in embarrassment.
Mr. Speaker, he just doesn't get it. They crashed the economy, mortgages skyrocketing, doubling the debt. They say they're going to max out the government's credit card at the next budget, and he won't.
Order. I think the Chief Whip's getting very carried away. He doesn't want to lead everybody for a cup of tea, does he? Come on.
They have forfeited the right to be lecturing others about the economy. Somebody coming off a fixed-rate mortgage is going to be paying an average of £240 more each and every month. A constant reminder that working people are paying the price for the damage that they've done to the economy. This week, I met one of the employees at Iceland in Warrington, Phil. I'm sure Phil would be...
Order. Mr. Gibson. Sorry. Mr. Starmer. Order. The same voice keeps appearing again. It won't appear anymore. So I'm just letting you know now. Keir Starmer.
laughing at an employee at Iceland who's struggling with his mortgage. Shame. He told me that his mortgage is going up by a staggering £1,000 a month, Prime Minister. He doesn't want other averages, other people, other stories. That's what's happening to him. If the member for Mid Norfolk on £120,000 can't afford this Tory government, how on earth can people like Phil?
Well, actually, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the management of the economy, Phil and millions... I think Phil and millions of people like him are now ensuring that inflation is less than half of the rate that it was when we were talking a year ago, putting more money in their pocket. And thanks to this government, Phil and millions of other workers, not just at Iceland, but across the country, are benefiting this month in their pay packet for a tax cut worth hundreds of pounds for someone on an average salary. But I hope he explained to Phil the cost of his policies. Did he explain to Phil how Phil is going to have to pay for his £28 billion green spending spree? How it's going to cost Phil in higher taxes, more coming out of his pay packet? And did he explain to Phil that he'd be better off sticking with our plan rather than going back to square one with him?
I would invite the Prime Minister to get in touch with Phil and explain to him how paying £1,000 more on his mortgage is making him better off, because that's not how he feels. He's just so out of touch. It's unbelievable. Finding hundreds of pounds extra a month, that may not seem like a big deal to the Prime Minister. But let me tell him, most people don't have that sort of money knocking around. And if that wasn't bad enough, Mr. Speaker, this week, he told every council in the country to put their council tax up by the maximum of 5%. That's 26 tax rises now, Prime Minister. And he says everything's fine, people are better off. But when people see their mortgages going up, their council tax going up, food prices still going up, who does he expect them to believe? His boasts or their bank account?
Minister! Well, Mr. Speaker, again, I was puzzled because, again, he resorts, as always, to the politics of envy here. But after recently and repeatedly attacking not just me but the government for lifting the bonus cap, I was genuinely surprised to see that the Shadow Chancellor just today has announced that she now supports the government's policy on the bankers' bonus cap. I don't know if he mentioned that to Phil when he was having a chat with him, but I'm sure he can fill us in. But I can tell him that trust and economic credibility come from sticking to a plan. But it's becoming clear you cannot trust a word that he says. And again, when the Shadow Chancellor says or claims that they won't borrow much, they won't raise Phil's taxes, we now know that those promises simply, again, they just aren't worth the Wikipedia page they were copied from.
Mr. Speaker, I actually didn't expect him to be laughing at Phil. I did not expect him to be laughing at Phil, not addressing Phil.
Look, I made this statement very clear. Prime Minister, it's very serious that we make sure that people hear, both you and the Leader of the Opposition. It matters to the people who watch the proceedings of this chamber, and it's not good in the behaviour that seems to be carried out. Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister just doesn't get how hard it is for millions of people across the country like Phil. That is the primary problem, struggling with their mortgages, their bills, the spiralling cost of living. And the Prime Minister's response is never to take responsibility, show contrition, or even any level of basic understanding. He's so detached, he thinks he can paint a world in which their problems simply don't exist. The problem is he can't even fool his own MPs, let alone anyone else. The member for Mid Norfolk says he's exhausted. He's looking forward to new opportunities outside of Parliament. Why doesn't the Prime Minister do him a favour, call an election, so he and the whole country can move on?
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. But whether it's Phil, whether it's everyone else across the country, the plan that we're putting in place is working to help people, and we're making progress. Just this week, taking action to stop children from vaping. just this week ensuring that people can visit their pharmacies to get the healthcare they need, freeing up millions of GP appointments, and just this week, millions of working people starting to see hundreds of pounds of tax cuts delivered in their pay packet, Mr. Speaker. That is a plan that is working. All he's offering is £28 billion of tax rises, and that is the choice, Mr. Speaker. It's a brighter future with us, or back to square one with them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister likes to attend live sport, and so I wonder whether he would join me in welcoming the decision of the Planning Inspector in upholding Rugby Council's rejection of an application for development at Brandon Stadium in my constituency, to keep the doors open for it to remain a sporting venue, so that future generations will enjoy the thrills and spills of motorcycle speedway and stock cars.
Prime Minister. Well, I join my honourable friend in paying tribute and being proud of actually Britain's rich history in the automotive and motorsport sectors, and the stadium that he talks about is a historic motorsport venue, and whilst it's been a shame to see it fall into disrepair, I hope that the decision he refers to enables a possibility of both speedway and stock car racing to return, and I know that my honourable friend will rightly continue to champion this cause.
SNP Leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, when the Tories scrapped the cap on bankers' bonuses in the autumn during a cost of living crisis, the Labour Party rightly opposed it. Yet here we are, just 3 months later, and the Labour Party support scrapping the cap on bankers' bonuses. Shameful. But is the Prime Minister comforted by the fact that he's now no longer alone in this House on being completely out of touch with public opinion?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said at the time, we supported the decision of the independent regulator because this was the right thing for financial stability. But that, Mr. Speaker, is because on this side of the House, we have a set of convictions and we have a plan and we stick to it. But he's absolutely right to point out the flip-flopping and U-turning and no convictions of the party opposite.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, scrapping the cap on bankers' bonuses was only made possible due to Brexit. So what the Westminster parties are now telling the public is that it's OK for bankers to have unlimited Brexit bonuses, but for the public sitting at home, struggling to feed their families, they have to suck up and deal with the additional food price costs as a result of Brexit red tape. That is the cost, and that is the reality of broken Brexit Britain. Isn't it the case that the great achievement of this Tory government is getting the Labour Party to agree to that bleak future?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're actually delivering benefits for people across Scotland, not just least in new free trade deals that are opening up markets for Scottish exporters, free ports that are attracting jobs and investment, the Brexit pubs guarantee, cutting the cost of a pint in Scottish pubs. But when he talks about the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, the thing that he could do most to help is make sure that Scotland isn't the highest tax part of the United Kingdom. And it's not just for high earners, Mr. Speaker. Everybody earning £28,500 or more is paying more tax in Scotland than they would in England, thanks to the SNP.
Davison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One punch thrown, 2 days on life support, then 3 children left without a father. A 4-year sentence handed down, released after 2, but one grieving mother has to live a life sentence of agony. Sentencing for one-punch killers is not working in this country. Does the Prime Minister agree that now is the time to finally introduce a specific offence and a tougher minimum sentence for one-punch manslaughter?
Prime Minister.
I pay tribute to the work my honourable friend has done in bringing attention to so-called one-punch manslaughter and highlighting, as she knows well, the anguish those cases cause for the families of the victims. And I know the Ministry of Justice has looked very carefully at the amendment that my honourable friend has proposed, and I know that she'll be meeting the Minister for Safeguarding shortly to both discuss her specific amendment and how we might best address the wider issue.
Sir Ed Davey.
Speaker.
Order. Ed Davey.
My constituent Millie A wheelchair user had a serious accident at a sporting event. Millie was left waiting on the floor in pain for over 2 hours before an ambulance arrived. During her months in hospital since, she's been dropped badly multiple times, left stuck in her bed for days at length. She's even been told to soil herself when there's no one to take her to the toilet. Before all this, Millie was living independently and working, but the prospect of her returning to work is being destroyed by the crisis in the NHS and care system. I'm sure the Prime Minister will agree that no one should ever have to go through what Millie has, so will he look again at our proposals to make sure every patient gets the high-quality care they need?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear about Millie's case, and if there are specific aspects of it that need to be examined, I'm sure the Health Secretary will follow up with the honourable gentleman. And more generally, we want to make sure everyone gets the care they deserve, which is why we're not just investing record sums in the NHS, but ensuring that there are record numbers of doctors, nurses, and new innovative forms of treatment like surgical hubs and virtual wards, all of which is showing that ambulance times that he mentioned are lower today than they were this time last year.
Saxby. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The number one reason for children's hospital admissions in North Devon is for dental treatment. We have no NHS capacity and no orthodontist in Barnstable. Our dentists cannot recruit, even with large golden hellos. The emergency dental plan does seem to have been stuck at the Treasury forever. My right honourable friend uses spare set of keys and pop round and rescue it for us, please. My constituents and I would be ever so grateful.
Prime Minister. My honourable friend has rightly championed the provision of dentistry in her local area. We're investing £3 billion a year, and the reformed contracts in dentistry from the NHS have improved access while ensuring fairer remuneration for dentists, and we're also providing more financial support for those who need it the most. So around half of the course of treatment last year were delivered to those who are non-paying, both adults and children. But yes, more needs to be done, and that's why our dentistry recovery plan will be published shortly.
Andrew Bridgen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More than 2 decades ago, the then Prime Minister Tony Blair misled this House by promoting and endorsing the Post Office Horizon IT system as perfect, protecting the large corporation that created it and causing untold harm and damage and misery to innocent people. Can the current Prime Minister think of anything he has promoted in partnership with huge businesses as safe and effective, which has ultimately harmed the British people? And will he use this opportunity to correct that safe and effective statement, or will he choose the same line as Tony Blair, sit back, do nothing, and let the misery just continue to pile up?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as we've been clear, the Horizon scandal is a terrible miscarriage of justice, and we're doing everything that we can to make it right. To what he was more broadly insinuating, let me be unequivocal from this dispatch box that COVID vaccines are safe, Mr. Speaker.
Jill Gideon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The shocking revelations of the Horizon scandal highlighted the Post Office's financial incompetence, and my right honourable friend will know that the public's confidence in the institution is at an all-time low. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that, as high street banks are closing branches across the country, we should look to developing new community banking solutions rather than giving the Post Office sole responsibility for providing access to cash and other banking services in poorly served neighbourhoods?
Prime Minister. I thank my honourable friend for a question, but I also just say that we shouldn't mistake conflating this scandal with the actions of many hard-working local postmasters and sub-postmasters, because customers can access cash and banking services through a wide range of channels, including a contract with the Post Office counter service, which does provide a valuable channel. And that I agree with her, though, the importance of access to cash, which is why the government has legislated to protect that as part of the recent Financial Services and Markets Act, and ensures that the vast majority of people should be no more than 3 miles away from such a cash point.
Tom Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the Nolan principles, integrity, states that holders of public office should not act to gain material benefits for themselves, their family or their friends. Prime Minister, on the 6th of January, you tweeted a link to the Conservative Party website which seemed to scrape people's data and place unwanted cookies on their machines. The Good Law Project is now pursuing. Can the Prime Minister Minister assure the House that no laws have been broken by his party?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, of course our party follows all laws.
Robert Jenrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a first responsibility for government is to fix the housing crisis that young people didn't cause. 3 years ago, we dragged house building in this country up to the highest level since 1987, after the last Labour government left it at its lowest level since the 1920s. But house building is weakening. We need to do more. Will my right honourable friend consider using the budget to do as he and I did together during the pandemic and cut stamp duty to boost housing starts, to reignite the economy and to support thousands of businesses across our country?
Prime Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend is right to point out that since 2010 we have delivered 2.5 million additional homes, on track to deliver 1 million just in this Parliament, and help over 850,000 families into home ownership through schemes such as Help to Buy and Right to Buy. Obviously, tax decisions are a matter for the Chancellor, but I would point out that our existing stamp duty relief for first-time buyers ensures the vast majority of first-time buyers in our country pay absolutely no stamp duty.
Marcia de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The APPG on eye health and visual impairment has today published polling that found that nearly half of employers exclude blind and partially sighted people from their workplaces, and 1 in 4 said that they would not be willing to make workplace adjustments. The disability employment gap remains stubbornly at 30%, and the pay gap means that blind and partially sighted people effectively work for free for 47 days of the year. So will the Prime Minister meet with me and sight loss organisations to discuss how we can create a more inclusive workforce?
Prime Minister.
Well, I share the honourable lady's ambition to have an inclusive workforce, and the record in supporting those with disabilities into work over the past several years has been incredibly strong. I know this is something that the Work and Pension Secretary is actively looking at and making sure that our accessibility plan is up to date and inclusive, and I'll ensure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
Sir Michael Ellis.
Mr. Speaker, having visited recently, I know that Israel remains in shock following the rape, murder and butchery of Hamas. All of us want to see a peaceful and demilitarised Palestinian state. However, Hamas remain in control in large parts of Gaza. Their support is growing in the West Bank. Nearly 2/3 of Palestinians in polling reject coexistence with Israel, and the Palestinian Authority has continued to promote hatred of Jews. Does my right honourable friend agree that any recognition of a Palestinian state must address these issues and can only come about as part of a negotiated settlement between Israel and the Palestinians?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government's position is clear. My honourable friend is right that there are steps and conditions that need to be put in place on this journey. First and foremost, the removal of Hamas from Gaza, a Palestinian-led government in Gaza and the West Bank, a concrete plan to reform and support the Palestinian Authority, a reconstruction plan for Gaza, and a two-state solution which we have long supported. So let me be clear, we stand with Israel, and the terrorist threat that they face must be limited, and Israel's lasting security must be guaranteed.
Neil Lambie.
Mr. Speaker, on the 15th of November last year, I appealed to the Prime Minister to choose de-escalation and peace over violence, death and destruction. He called me naive. So far, over 26,000 souls have perished in Gaza. Shameful. In a powerful and moving open letter in Monday's New York Times, the Jewish Voice for Peace Rabbinical Council cited Deuteronomy. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life, accusing President Biden of choosing death. If the Prime Minister won't listen to me or the ICJ, will he listen to the Rabbinical Council, or will he call them naive too?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've been clear multiple times that we are concerned, deeply concerned, about the impact of the fighting in Gaza on the civilian population. Too many people have lost their lives, and there is a desperate need for increased humanitarian support in Gaza. I won't go over all the debates we've had about the conditions that are necessary for an immediate pause leading to a sustainable ceasefire, but I can assure the House that we are doing everything that we can to get more aid into the region as quickly as possible.
Kelly Tolhurst.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chatham Docks supports over 800 local high-value jobs which are at risk as the owners are continuing in their pursuit to displace successful businesses such as ArcelorMittal Kent Wire. The Labour Council are failing to honour the commitment they made before the local elections to protect the docks and the jobs. Even their leader, the Right Honourable Member for Holborn and St Pancras, said he was proudly backing Save Chatham Docks campaign. Will my Right Honourable friend meet with me to see how we can protect the docks and save those jobs for my constituents? And isn't this just another example of how Labour and their leaders change their position depending on which way the wind blows?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend has been a constant champion of Chatham Docks, and I am disappointed to hear that the local Labour Council are failing to honour the commitments that they've made. But also, as she points out, I'm not surprised to see that the Leader of the Opposition has said one thing and then consequently done another. The docks support hundreds of jobs, and I join with her in calling on the Council to rethink their approach.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
It's me. That was PM Rishi Sunak taking questions from MPs at the House of Commons. We're still joined in the studio here by Paul Holmes, Tory MP for Eastleigh, and Parliamentary Private Secretary to Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, and Louise Haigh, the Shadow Transport Secretary.
And you've been sending your questions in to gbnews@gbviews.com for our panel. You can continue to do it. Louise would be Transport Secretary if Labour wouldn't. Maybe you've got some questions on buses, trains, cars, whatever you fancy. Because remember, this programme is different. It's all about your questions.
The first question that we've got in is from Carol in Staffordshire. She got in touch saying she voted leave, and of course today is the 4th anniversary of the UK leaving the European Union. She'd vote leave again today, she says. She never thought that changes after Brexit would be so quick. She thought it would happen for 10 years. She went in with her eyes wide open, Paul, and didn't understand what she's voting for. She's fed up with people saying that Brexiteers didn't understand what they voted for, basically.
And I think
you voted for leave,
so I voted for leave. I absolutely agree with Carol. I think the problem during the referendum is that so many people like Carol and myself were fed up with being told that they're wrong or they had motivations which weren't there. I voted leave because I wanted Britain to run its own country, I wanted us to make our own laws, and I wanted us to make the success of it. And Carol's right that it will take a longer time, but I would argue they're already seeing some of the benefits of that, including increased health spending that we got from being able to leave the European Union.
Louise Haigh, Shadow Transport Secretary. This is a question from Michael from Kent, and he has a question for Starmer. And you today are Keir Starmer. Can you give the British people a cast iron guarantee that you will not take us back into the European Union?
Yes, I can give that cast iron guarantee. We have been very clear. We want no reruns of the Brexit referendum. We will not be seeking membership of the European Union, but we need to make Brexit work, and that's the Labour Party's plan. We've set out a number of agreements that we would like to make with the EU in order to ease trade and reduce some of the red tape around trade that's hurting our economy at the moment, but we have absolutely no plans. And can I just say that viewers are actually giving their genuine questions. Sometimes presenters and producers make them up. So congratulations to GB News for genuinely...
We can make it no.
Too good for it.
Too good for it, yeah, absolutely. So closer alignment, but the sovereignty issue is secure if Labour become...
Absolutely, and look, there's certain things like, you know, we've just seen power sharing reinstated today with Northern Ireland, but the reason that's been down for so long is because there hasn't been this agreement with the European Union over how that should work. So we need to speed that up. We need to see these improvements. We need to see Brexit work for ordinary people and for the people who voted for it.
One of the topics in the PMQs there, which Keir Starmer went on, was cost of living, mortgages, and one to you, Paul, from John. He says the cost of living and economy are both important short-term pressures, but failure on immigration will ruin this country, he says, perhaps forever. And you can't control immigration. You've been in charge for 14 years.
Immigration's coming down. The Prime Minister has made immigration his number one priority. No, but what we've seen a reduction in the number of illegal migrants coming across the Channel. We've brought in measures that are coming into effect in March, which will see 300,000 fewer people coming in than they did last year. And that's a key dividing line between us and the Labour Party, because the Labour Party has voted against every measure that the Prime Minister's put forward, and they have no plan.
What do you say to that, Louise?
Well, look, I think these figures on immigration show a shocking dereliction of duty of this government over the last 14 years, and they are a direct consequence of their policies. The figures today show a 156% increase in the number of visas for social care workers. So the government has continued to rely on people coming into this country and working in certain occupations, but done nothing to build up the workforce in this country, and that's what Labour have set out plans to do, to bring down those immigration figures, but also to get local British people into those jobs.
What number would you be happy with? Kelly Mahmood said less than 100,000 a year net migration into the UK. Would you back that?
Yeah, look, I don't think there's any point in putting targets on. David Cameron and George Osborne did that repeatedly and failed to meet them every time, and Rishi Sunak has not put a target on, and so we're not going to pluck numbers out of thin air, but we do have a plan to tackle these issues.
We're going to be heading to a break in a second, but Barry, remember to tell us where you're from. We're a family here. We want to know where you're getting in touch from. Regarding immigration, saying we need to reduce UK numbers to relieve pressure on services and infrastructure. People are quick to talk about immigrants paying tax, but no one talks about how much they cost our system compared to how much they generate.
I think Barry's right, and that's why we've brought in the measures that we're trying to bring in. So that reduction in visas, that will see 300,000 fewer people come in than last year. But what we announced today, for example, British Homes for British People, is another example where we are prioritising people that work hard, play by the rules.
What does that mean?
Well, if you look, for example, at some Labour councils are issuing social housing, to 40% of their social housing to people that weren't born here or came here into this country.
So what's the logic of that? So would they be on this? Explain. Follow that thought
So
through.
what we're saying is that people work hard, play by the rules, who are born here, will get those houses first. So what we are seeing is that we have a housing problem.
Louise Haig?
Well, they're split on it, because at one moment Peter Cole said he agreed with it, and the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party said she didn't. So I have no idea.
Well, we've got absolutely no detail on how this is going to work, and the fact is that it's people that have citizenship here and are working here. That, you know, the vast majority of people that are born outside this country, and certainly that don't have any immigration status, are not entitled to social housing. So it's not clear to me who you are excluding from the current social housing rules. I don't know how this is going to work in practice.
Well, still ahead, we'll be hearing from more of your questions to our political panel. Keep sending them in. Say where you're from. We'll be with Paul Holmes, Tory MP for Eastleigh, and the PPS to Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, and Louise Haig, the Shadow Transport Secretary.
All about your views. Keep them coming.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The time is 12:41. Welcome back to PMQs Live with me, Gloria Di Piero, and Christopher Hope.
We're still joined here in the studio in Westminster by Paul Holmes, Tory MP for Eastleigh, and a parliamentary private secretary, a ministerial aide essentially to Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, and Louise Haigh, Shadow Transport Secretary.
So your questions are coming in thick and fast. We love it. We love to know your name and where you are from too. So I've got a question which is relevant to you, Louise. Leslie... No, hang on.
I've got to hear from you.
Oh, good, no, you go for it.
Lou Haigh is Leslie from Gosport. She's a pensioner. Right. She's lucky and careful enough during working life to provide herself with additional pension income, saving as much as she can to provide with extra welfare payments. In return, the government, by not raising tax thresholds or taking more and more of this pension, bigging themselves up, she says, by saying how wonderful they are by cutting national insurance happening today in many pay packets, but they won't do them to millions of pensioners in a similar situation who won't benefit from this so-called tax reduction.
Well, that was exactly what Keir raised in PMQs earlier when he talked about the government are cutting £2 off your tax bill, but taking £10 elsewhere, and that's because of exactly what Leslie's described. It's known as fiscal drag, and your viewers may have seen that talked about in the news. Basically, because they've not put the income threshold up, it means more and more people are in the higher tax bracket and paying a lot more tax, and it's having a really profound impact on people's incomes and people's bills. You know, for pensioners, we've set out what plans we want to do to lower their energy bills, which is a huge driver for inflation at the moment and a massive cost for lots of people. So hopefully that would help Leslie, but we'll be setting out more ahead of the election.
A simple question to you, Paul, and this is specifically to you. Jason, we don't know where you're from, Jason, but keep telling us where you're from, because we love getting your emails. It's all about your questions in this show. Jason says this: the Prime Minister is simply out of touch, like the whole Tory party are. My question to Paul is, does he agree the Conservative Party is out of touch? I'm sure you're going to say no, but tell us why. Do you recognise that some voters believe that to be true?
I think politics in general is difficult at the moment with the difficulties that are going on with people out there, including people in Eastleigh and my constituency. Is the Tory party out of touch? Absolutely not. The leader of my party, Rishi Sunak, has a good success story. What would be seen as a British success story. Parents came here, sent him to school, worked really hard. He worked for what he's got. And I want everyone in this country to have that. And you have to look at the actions that we're taking. What we have done, so the viewer in Gosport, we've raised pensions for people, the state pension, by the greatest amount that we've ever done. We're investing in the health service. We're reducing the immigration that your viewers want to happen. We're acting on behalf of the British people. And I would argue that we're doing that in a much better way than the Labour Party would do, and we'll see that choice at the next election.
It's true, isn't it?
Well, I think your viewers will be quite surprised to hear that the NHS is being invested in. It takes, on average, a month to get a GP appointment, and when Labour were last in government, we had a guarantee that people could access their GP within 48 hours. So on every metric, the last Labour government invested in and improved the NHS for patients, and that's exactly what we're setting out plans to do again.
But look at the announcement we've made today. We've freed up 10 million GP appointments by allowing pharmacists to be able to treat people in a pharmacy, to free up some more appointments. That's a sensible community-led approach.
That's a great approach, but 1,000 pharmacies have closed in the 14 years that you've been in government. 2,000 GPs have been lost, and millions more people are languishing on waiting lists. We're exactly back to where we were when Labour took office in 1997, with people waiting in hospital corridors to be seen and not able to access basic health services. So I think your viewers will judge which government has prioritised and invested in the NHS
more money than ever before has gone into the NHS.
I mean, he's right. Look at the outcomes.
We've just had a pandemic. That's the other thing.
The waiting lists were at record levels before the pandemic.
West Streeting called it a leaky bucket, didn't he? And said how was an interesting intervention from him, and saying how we'll try and plug it. I mean, I think Labour's got the most space politically to reform the NHS.
Well, look, I think nobody thinks that any public service should be unreformed, and the last Labour government made lots of reforms to the NHS, and that's what delivered the better outcomes. So Paul's saying, yeah, record amounts of money in the NHS. Look at the outcomes for patients. They have not been improved.
Waiting lists are down.
Louise Haigh, with a transport brief in mind, Adrian, not sure where Adrian's from, but he says, and he's emailed in, GB views
at GB News. Keep them coming.
Keep them coming.
We've
Come on,
still
stay
got
where
10
you're
minutes.
Adrian says, how would Labour, your party, you probably, if you're Transport Secretary, make train journeys more affordable? And what will the cost of that be to the taxpayer?
Well, I think anybody who's tried to travel at the moment, particularly across where I'm from, the north of England, would recognise that our railways are pretty broken at the moment. Anybody who's tried to use Avanti down that west coast, we're experiencing record delays and record cancellations.
But that's fares, not
so we've got a plan to fix the railways as a whole, which involves bringing operators into public ownership. But that will actually bring significant savings. Our railways are really wasteful at the moment because they're so fractured. I'll be setting out plans actually in just 2 or 3 weeks' time that will demonstrate how we'll save money and how that money could be reinvested into the railways. To bring those operators into public ownership. All of them, absolutely, within the first term of a Labour government, and to bring decisions around the infrastructure, which the public pay for at the moment. It's the most expensive bit of the railways, and the operators into one body, so that we can actually make the money out of it and stop operators abstracting that profit.
There's an answer, Paul.
How much is that going to cost? I mean, the Labour
There's
Party
no compensation. There's absolutely no compensation provided to operators.
They don't ever say to the British people how these things are going to.
Why would it cost anything, Paul?
You know, it didn't work before. Nationalised railways did not work before.
Are these railways working for your constituents?
My constituents can see that there's investment going into the railways.
Where?
They are. I mean, one of the things that I would say, I find it very interesting that the Labour Party, a day after rail strikes, let's accept the unions pay for many of the Labour MPs to be here and also pay for the Labour Party to go into the next general election. They haven't condemned the rail strikes. That created misery for my constituents trying to get into London
Whose government has been provoking the rail strikes? We don't want these rail strikes to happen, but employers themselves have said that Grant Shapps, as Tory Transport Secretary, deliberately provoked and poisoned this industrial dispute, and is exactly why it's been going on for so long. We don't want these strikes to happen. It's your government, and your Transport Secretary has not even met with the unions to try and find a deal in over a year.
Louise Hake, if there is a Labour government, you can't guarantee that the strikes aren't going to continue. How? Exactly. They want more pay.
No, of course not. Nobody can say we'll never have strikes, but there have been... this is the first national strike on the railways in more than 30 years. There was no national strike under the last Labour government. There's no rail strike in Labour... there's no strike in Labour-run Wales, Gloria, where the Labour-run government there works in social partnership with the unions. They found a deal that doesn't break the bank. They agreed some workplace reforms, and they've avoided disruptive industrial action. This government has deliberately provoked and poisoned the industrial dispute and prolonged it.
If you become Transport Secretary, how will you pay for the increase that those people are asking for?
Who has paid for the strike for more than a year? It's cost £1 billion. This government has wasted more than £1 billion in taxpayers' money by provoking and prolonging this industrial dispute. That's more than they ever expected to save through workplace reforms.
What I would argue viewers are seeing today is another Labour shadow cabinet minister who say what they want to do. They want to spend the money. They want to do this.
What money have I just admitted to spending? Your government has wasted more than £1 billion in taxpayers' money through this strike. I'm not making any funding commitment. Your government has wasted over £1 billion in taxpayers' money through this industrial dispute, which your government deliberately provoked.
You want to be Transport Secretary, but you can't say how you would pay for an increase in those wages for those drivers to stop the strikes.
I've not said we will deliver an increase in wages. The dispute is about more than pay and about workplace reform. I'm absolutely not committing to an increased pay offer, but your government has deliberately provoked and poisoned this dispute, and it's exactly why we've still got the first national railway strike in over 30 years.
I've got to say, as a commuter getting a taxi to and from last night, because I don't know why these rail companies can't put a minimum service on, given they've got the powers to. I mean, they made all the political noise about it, and it hasn't happened yet.
What I would like, and Lee Rowley said this is on the media around yesterday, I would like the rail bosses to invoke the minimum service levels that the government put through, but they're not, and I think that's something that the DfT are looking at. It was again opposed by the Labour Party.
It's opposed by the rail operators.
But we've put in those measures to ensure that there's a minimum level of service.
I'm going to change the subject a bit, lift it to the higher plane, possibly, on defence. Now, Richard has asked a question. We're serving generals publicly saying we haven't got the capability to defend the UK alone. The Americans are saying we're at risk of losing our status tier 1 status, forgive me, and are saying don't cut the army anymore. What's your view, Paul, on cutting defence spending? You're obviously PPS to Lord Cameron. There's concerns about World War III, for goodness sake. People are talking about, a civilian army. Where do you sit on that?
I think we've never got to grips with the wasteful spending that the MOD puts out. And
you've been in power 14 years.
Yeah, and in terms of defence procurement, I just think it's still a mess that we've seen with certain projects. So the amount of money that's gone into the armed forces is going up. We've committed to 2.5% of GDP GDP in line with NATO. It's not got there fast enough, but I wholly accept that with the uncertain world that we have, we need to invest more in our armed forces, and I think that's what we'll hear in the coming months.
I want to ask you about a different question. Both of you, quickly. It's Jackie. Jackie, please tell us where you're from. It's a great question. Sometimes don't you feel like a kindergarten teacher babysitting a bunch of children? She's referring to the parliamentary event of every week, Prime Minister's Question Time. Isn't it the worst advert for politicians? Louise Hay from Labour.
Yeah, I think so. There's lots of name-calling and yah-booing. When I go to primary schools, I say, you know, those kids wouldn't be allowed to behave like that way in their classroom, so I don't think it's a very good advert for politicians.
And you had the Speaker intervene quite a few times, like as a parent and in the kindergarten, didn't he? Was that appropriate?
He did today. I think look, as I said at the beginning of the programme, he wants good order, and I want to be picked for a question next week. So I'm not going to criticise him. He told me off last week, though. You know, last week he named me, and we like shouting it occasionally.
Have you ever been named and shamed?
No, I'm far too much of a teacher's pet. Oh, God, it'll be awful.
You've been fantastic. And you at home have been fantastic.
Great questions.
Cracking questions, as ever. Get thinking for next week what you're going to ask. Coming up, it's Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Emily.
Tom and Emily, what do you have in your show?
That's right, a huge show, a huge day. It hasn't just been Prime Minister's questions, but there's far more going on too, not least the Labour Party polling Muslim voters worried about their positioning over issues in the Middle East. Is that a particular area of concern in certain constituencies? We'll dig into that story.
Yes, and Nicola Sturgeon at the COVID inquiry, she was heckled on the way in, but she's also apologised for deleting her WhatsApp messages. She says she doesn't recall ever receiving an email saying that she should keep them. So, do you believe her?
And indeed, it's 4 years to the day since we left the European Union. In the meantime, we've had a war, we've had a pandemic. My goodness, maybe all of those worries of the Remain campaign were true. What's next? Plagues of locusts? We'll be diving into the outcomes of that Brexit deal and indeed how the country's fared compared to European countries in the last 4 years.
What a thrilling show coming up. Well, that's all from us here in Westminster.
But you have been watching and listening to PMQs Live with Gloria Di Piero and Chris Hope. Get thinking about your questions for next week. What would you be asking the Prime Minister? What do you want to ask the Leader of the Opposition? We'll have our top political panel in play. In fact, I think I know who it is. I think it's John Cryer from Labour and Esther McVeigh, I believe.
OK, don't go anywhere. Up next is Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Emily.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Dry for many of us today, sunniest in the south, a lot of cloud elsewhere, and it will continue to feel cold, especially in the south where we've got this easterly wind and cold air imported from the continent. Further north, lighter winds with high pressure nearby, but a lot of cloud coming into northern and eastern Scotland, southern Scotland as well, northern and eastern England. And here there will be some showers, rain at lower levels, some snow over the hills, but mostly these showers are light, 1 or 2 showers for Wales as well. But otherwise, western Scotland, southern and south